It is election year 2024, and we anticipate for sure, we've talked about this a lot here, that this is going to be one of the most intense and unpredictable political years because we have the obviously unprecedented fact that the person leading the nomination primary race in the polls by 40 points and who is leading in all of the key swing states, including the ones Joe Biden was declared the winner of in 2020, Donald Trump, is also a person who is currently indicted in 4 separate jurisdictions. In other words, the Democratic Party is simultaneously running against Trump, most likely, and trying to put him in prison in 4 different cases. That already is a bizarre year. At the same time, you have the United States government trying to define the Trump movement as an insurrectionary movement, as a criminal movement. And this is just the start. If Donald Trump remains politically strong, what the Democrats and the corporate media, which is their allies in the U.S. security state, are willing to do in order to prevent Donald Trump from being reelected president is literally unlimited. I don't believe they have any limits on what they're willing to do in order to prevent that from happening. And that's going to make an extremely unpredictable year. And as a sign of just how desperate they're getting, we now have 2 of, I would say, the most blindly partisan Democrats in all of media. The MSNBC host Chris Hayes and Brian Beutler, who used to work for Pod Save America and used to be a writer at The New Republic and now has his own Substack, who are now coming out and essentially saying that we think Nikki Haley by far is the best candidate for the Republicans to nominate. And therefore, they're urging Democratic Party voters in crossover primaries, meaning where Democrats can vote in the Republican primary if they want, and vice versa, to go vote in the Republican primary because Biden doesn't need their vote. The Democrats didn't allow a primary, even though there are primary opponents running against Biden. There's no debates. The Democrats are just going to pretend that Biden is their nominee with no contest, no debate necessary. But the Republicans have a primary, and so they're being told by the people most devoted to the Democratic Party and media that they should go and vote for Nikki Haley. Here is the tweet of Chris Hayes, the MSNBC host, his show, All In with Chris Hayes, where he says, check out this piece by Brian Beutler that Chris Hayes cited. So Chris Hayes on his show recommended this piece, talked about it, saying this is a possible strategy that liberals can use. And here you see the article on the screen by Brian Beutler that Chris Hayes recommended. Liberals in open primary states should vote for Nikki Haley, yes, even after her rake-stopping Civil War gaffathon. Now, in 2016, there were actually some Democrats, like Jonathan Chait and I think Matt Yglesias and others, who at first were saying Democrats should be happy with Trump as a nominee because he was the most moderate, and then they changed and they said Trump would be the best person for Hillary to run against because he would be the weakest candidate. And as usual, they got exposed as knowing absolutely nothing about politics, even though they write about it for a living. But that is one tactic when you try and encourage your voters to vote for the candidate that you think is the weakest. The Democrats actually did that effectively in the 2022 midterm, where they funded some of the candidates in the Republican primary who they thought would be the weakest general election candidates, and most of the people that Democrats backed that got the nomination for the Republican Party actually ended up losing in close races. This is not that strategy. The Democrats here, Chris Hayes, Brian Beutler, are not saying we want Democrats to go and vote for Nikki Haley because she would be the weakest candidate against Joe Biden. They're not invoking this as a tactical argument. They're saying, as Americans, we want the best people to be running against each other. And while we as Democrats believe Joe Biden is the best president, we think the second best candidate, the person we think would be president, the best president after Joe Biden, is Nikki Haley. That's from the liberal Democratic perspective. So here is what Brian Beutler writes, quote, she would be a terrible president who would empower even worse people much like Ramaswamy, in fact, to undermine the country's freedoms and punish its liberal enclaves where most people live. In a just world, nobody who's too scared to stand up to neo-Confederates would ever hold any office. but she's a person of higher character and more ethical purpose than Donald Trump. She's running for president because she wants a big prize, a bad reason, not because she wants to stay out of prison, a worse reason. If she were to lose the election, she'd probably admit it, which is more than we can say about Trump, who once again insists it was stolen. Now, when I went and noted on Twitter that this is a case where liberals were saying that they like Nikki Haley better than any other Republican presidential candidate, Brian Butler responded and said, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. He posted part of his article where he was making the case for Nikki Haley. And it is amazing to me that if you look at what Nikki Haley actually believes, she's by far the most enthusiastic supporter of all American wars. She has not only supported literally every American war over the past 20 or 25 years. She's not one of those people who regrets her support for the Iraq War, but she thinks the United States has not fought enough wars. She wants more wars. She's already calling for a bombing of Iran. She wanted Netanyahu to go to town in Gaza without limits. Obviously, she's fanatically supportive of the war in Ukraine and wants the U.S. to fund that too. And she's a very enthusiastic and robust supporter of the U.S. security state, of the CIA, of the FBI, of Homeland Security, of the NSA, because she's an authoritarian, as evidenced by her call to force Americans to register with their government ID if they want to participate on the internet. And you would think that comparing that to, say, the fact that Trump was the first president in decades not to involve the United States in a new war, that would give you pause about praising Nikki Haley this way. But Democrats and liberals don't care about those issues. They don't care about new wars. They're happy with them. Biden got the United States involved in 2 new wars, in Ukraine and in Israel. They don't care about that. Democrats don't care about opposing the CIA and the FBI and Homeland Security and the NSA, because we've shown you polls many times showing that Democrats actually view those agencies positively and they trust them and see them as allies. So in this preference, you can see how the Democratic Party and their media spokespeople like Chris Hayes or Brian Butler, what their priorities are, and they don't care at all about neoconservative warmongering or support for the U.S. security state. In fact, that is endemic to the Democratic Party. And in that view, they see the world completely similarly to the leading neocons, which is why neocons are now Democrats. Here is David Frum back in late December 28th, saying exactly the same thing as Chris Hayes and Brian Butler. He wrote, quote, "You dunk, but Nikki Haley winning the Republican nomination in 2024 to present voters with a Biden-Haley choice is the pivot that pulls America off the dark timeline and onto the light one." Biden-Haley, that is the way that we get America to be back on the path of light and not darkness. So says David Frum and Chris Hayes and Brian Butler, and that is why there is a complete union of American liberals and neoconservatives, because they see the world exactly the same way, and you can see that in their preference scheme. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.